Well, today is a very, very special day with a very incredible human being and beautiful soul. I have the pleasure, the privilege, and the honor of having Dan Millman with me here today for you to listen to this and just enjoy this incredible human being's journey. Dan Millman is a former world champion athlete, Stanford University gymnastics coach, martial arts instructor, and Oberlin College professor. His 18 books, wow, and I've read quite a few of them, are published in 29 languages. His first book, Way of the Peaceful Warrior, was adapted to film in 2006, over a span of 40 years in 32 countries. Dan has taught the Peaceful Warrior's Way, a practical approach to living an aware, purposeful, and healthful life. I really enjoy this one quote where he says, "One doesn't need to become a peaceful warrior. By virtue of living here on planet Earth, each and every one of us is a peaceful warrior in training to the degree that we strive to live with a more peaceful heart, but also recognize that there are times we need to live with a warrior spirit." And so I can attest to this. And before I officially welcome you onto the voice that needs to be out there for people to hear you, Dan, I just want to let the listeners recall, let them know that it was on a flight. I was working with an athlete in Florida, a golfer. And as I was about to board the flight, he handed me the Peaceful Warrior. I devoured it from Florida all the way back to Vancouver. It didn't leave me. I just was like drinking it in. And then roll forward, I was about to develop in a TV series and documentary called The Zone of Excellence. And then your movie was coming out and it was being promoted in Vancouver, and I got to be part of the promotion team and got to meet you that evening and talked about doing the Zone of Excellence. Well, the Zone of Excellence got to the point of a pilot, and ESPN loved it, and they loved having you, and they loved the athletes, and then the athletes didn't want to sign, and the ESPN. So it was politics. It never got developed, but I did use the movie with all the athletes I ever worked with. I did make them watch that movie, and I don't mean like make them, but it was part of their curriculum, and every one of them loved it. And I used it with my daughter as well, and now with my grandchildren. So without further ado, I want to welcome you to this wonderful podcast that people are just going to devour. I know it. So welcome, Dan.
Well, thank you, Kali. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Oh, wonderful to have you. You know, we don't have much time because I know your time is precious, and I'm hoping that at the end of this, maybe I can, talk you into coming back again for another episode. But I wanted to know, Dan, what motivated you to become a peaceful warrior?
Well, I guess the easiest way to answer that is to explain how I came up with the term.
Right.
I was teaching a martial arts course at Oberlin College in Ohio, and it consisted of two martial arts, an introduction to Aikido and an introduction to Tai Chi. Both arts I had practiced enough to teach the basic course. So I was going to call it for the catalog The Way of the Warrior, which made sense. They're martial arts after all. But then I said, no, that doesn't quite fit because these are more internal martial arts. They're not aggressive. They're more receptive.
Right.
So in a light bulb moment, I said, hey, why don't I call it The Way of the Peaceful Warrior? And that's where the term first came from. I didn't fully understand it yet. It just was a term that worked for the course. And when I finally named the book, gave that title to the book, I started being asked questions about it. So I believe at birth, or maybe before birth, I sort of became a peaceful warrior, as you did, and as all of your listeners do. Because again, I emphasize it's not my way, it's our way. I just happen to use that term peaceful warrior because it expresses a certain balance about living with our head in the clouds, but our feet on the ground and dealing with the challenges of everyday life. So many people have resonated with that term somehow. It uplifts them. And so I can't really say when did I become a peaceful warrior, because we're all ready, all of
Mm-hmm.
us, peaceful warriors in training.
Right. And so I mean, there's got to be a fascination to it. And so what fascinates you about, being a peaceful warrior?
It's more important. It's like when people ask me what I believe. My beliefs
Right.
aren't important. Your beliefs are important. All your listeners' beliefs. How do we get inspired? How does it shine for us? Each of us is wired slightly differently. We share a common humanity, but we share different life experiences, genetics, ancestry. And so for me, the term just fit the book title. And after that, destiny carried me on like a wave to teaching. Now, I didn't write another book after Way of the Peaceful Warrior for 10 years because I figured I'd said what I had to say. But then new mentors came into my life, new information that was really exciting to me, cutting edge stuff, which I was moved to share. So I wrote a book in 1990 called Sacred Journey of
Right.
the Peaceful Warrior, and then No Ordinary Moments, when people said, Dan, your books inspired me, but how do I apply this to daily life? So I wrote No Ordinary Moments, A Peaceful Warrior's Guide to Daily Life. And then it went from there. I never wrote a book just to write a book. Each one was like a plane lined up on the runway, and I didn't know which one was going to get in line first. They each came organically in the moment they came. And that speaks to many writers out there who go through 5 universal phases of any creative process: dreaming, or coming up with an idea, and then drafting, bringing that idea into the material realm where it didn't exist before, then developing, which is stepping back and looking at that castle in our mind that looks now more like a garden shed, and then doing some renovations, and finally refining and sharing. And so each book went through that process. And so that's what I've been doing for 45 years, writing, but also speaking. I've been in 32 countries teaching seminars and talks and so on. So that's what I do. And it just happens to be around that theme of a peaceful warrior's approach to daily life.
Right. And so with that in mind, for you personally, what have been some of, or at least one or some of your most powerful experiences during this journey that has been a transformation, being that this is all about transformation, right? So in your own life and continue to be useful. So an experience, or maybe if you could share 2 that have been very transformational.
Sure. Well, they don't always look like uplifting spiritual experiences when, as depicted in the movie and of course in my book, I did shatter my right thigh bone, my femur, in about 40 places when my motorcycle crashed into a car that had turned in front of me, though I didn't drive anywhere near as recklessly as depicted in the movie. And they like to do that sort of.
Yeah, Hollywood.
Hollywood. But that shook me up, and I'm pointing up right now. I started asking bigger questions because I was in my 20s, early 20s. And that's the bulletproof age. You think you can do anything and you know everything. And it sobered me, and it made me think about my mortality and about life and what are we here for? So it kind of accelerated my evolution, I suppose. Now, I do not recommend fractures as a method of spiritual and personal growth.
No.
But we all face adversities of one kind or another. And I believe that sometimes climbing out of a dark hole can give us the strength to climb the mountain.
Right. And
So that's one experience. I mean, I've had other moments, numinous, what one might identify as spiritual moments of a sense of unity with all living things, a sense of divine perfection. These things come and go, and they're wonderful experiences, and they inform one's memory and consciousness, but they don't last with the same intensity. So really, I think it's about stabilizing in one's life good habits. And people sometimes come to me and say, Dan, I have an emotional or a relationship or a spiritual problem. Nonetheless, whatever they bring to me, I ask 3 questions. Are you doing regular, moderate exercise? Are you staying active almost every day? Are you eating a balanced diet for you? And are you getting enough rest? If we do those 3 foundational things, then we're better able to face the challenges of everyday life. Those are basics. And, it always comes back to the beginner's mind and back to basics.
Right.
You can define a master as someone who's very good at the basics.
Absolutely. I totally agree. I mean, with my previous life of being a professional figure skater, it always went back to the basics.
Yeah.
It always did. And even now when I get on the ice sometimes with my granddaughter, it's the basics, of course, very basic, but it's the thing I'm, have learned too with my Tai Chi and hoping to instill in my grandchildren that this is where it all starts. And you can, if you go back to the basics, right? Like you say, if you go back, you'll always have that foundation.
Exactly. When I turned 60, which was 18 years ago, actually.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
Yeah. But when I turned 60, I decided for my birthday, I wanted to learn to ride a unicycle. And a friend of mine loaned me his unicycle. I don't know if you've ever tried riding one, but it's a humbling experience. You get on it, whoop, goes out from under you, and get on it again, whoop, goes out from under you. So anyway, I went to a tennis court. He recommended that so I could get a death grip on the chain link fence and make my way in 45 minutes around the entire double court, holding onto the fence. Nobody was playing tennis yet that early in the morning. And to make a long story very short, I struggled through 3 weeks. The end of the first week, I could careen forward for 6 pedals, and 12 pedals the second week. And by the end of the third week, I could do figure eights on the unicycle.
Oh, wow.
Now, the reason I'm mentioning this, and I know you'll relate to it as an athlete, is I learned 2 things from that experience that I'd forgotten from gymnastics many years before. First, I remembered that everything is difficult until it becomes easy.
Mm.
And the second thing I learned and remembered was that there were certain days that everything fell apart. I was physically confused. I was mentally confused. I seemed worse than I was a week or 2 before.
Mm-hmm.
But I also noticed that usually the next day after those so-called bad days, I had a breakthrough.
Ah.
And the learning was actually taking place, going from the front brain to the back, more instinctive brain, like learning to drive a gear shift car,
Right.
And that's what was happening. And so that was when the learning was actually taking place. Now, the reason I think that's an important story to tell is because whether it's in a relationship, whether you have a crisis point, if you just stay with it, persist, keep practicing, keep working at it, you can break through the deeper levels of intimacy. If it's in a physical sport, if it's in business, creativity, the arts, you have bad days, but they're not really bad days. They're the ones you need to work through.
Right.
As a man named Shomo Morita, a Japanese psychiatrist, once said, when running up a hill, it's okay to give up and quit as many times as you want, as long as your feet keep moving.
Oh, I love it. Yeah. Well, there you go. Right. Mind, body.
Mm-hmm.
Mind, body. Absolutely. Wow. That is really a beautiful quote.
It's a good reminder.
It's a good reminder. Yeah.
And that's one of the ways this approach to living that I teach, that I call the Peaceful Warrior's Way, is different from many other, say, New Age teachings that emphasize manifesting and all these ideas that are speculative because you can't prove them or disprove them.
Right.
But the approach I take is working with what we have more control over. And the way I usually put it, I like to put it, is if there were a terrible storm outside, I ask people, I'd ask you, would it be your fault? Would it be your responsibility? And you'd have to say, no, it's not, because I can't control the weather. If you could control the weather, then you would have some responsibility for the storm.
Right.
So I think we can agree that we're more responsible for what we can control and less responsible for what we can't control. And so I believe in focusing more on what we can control. I don't mean what we can influence, because influence, there are a lot of techniques and methods and to try to influence our emotions or our thoughts. Like actors try to influence their performance by, method actors, by remembering a time they felt intensely in a certain way and so on. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. That's what influence is. But control means we will it to happen, it happens.
Right.
We intended. So what I have, this is a whole weekend course in a minute, which is I'm going to suggest that we have very little direct control by our will over our emotions. They pass through us like the weather. They change all the time. If we really pay close attention, we can't will ourselves to feel differently in the moment than the way we do. But don't worry, because the emotion will change soon enough, like the weather. Also, thoughts happen to us. They arise into our field of awareness. We don't say, I think I'll think this thought next. Nor do
Right.
we have a spam filter in our heads that can keep out certain thoughts. So thoughts come and go. They just arise and pass. Sometimes they're positive, sometimes they're negative. But we have very little control by our will over what thoughts appear. I'm not talking about using our mind and our intellectual capacity to write poetry or solve math problems. I'm
Okay.
talking about these random thoughts that pop up. We call it the discursive mind. In the Buddhist tradition, it's the monkey mind.
Mm-hmm.
In any case, one thing we do have control over and are responsible for is what we do. Whether
Right.
we feel confident or not, whether we feel motivated or not. I mean, we've all done things when we weren't motivated to do it, like taking out the trash. But we do it because it needs doing. So this approach to living that I teach focuses on action because our lives have been shaped to this point in time and into the future by what we've done over time, our actual behavior. And so that's the emphasis in the way that I teach. And the rest is complications, trying to fix our emotions or thoughts so that we can live wisely and well. I think that's a wild goose chase.
Mm-hmm.
Barbara Rasp, a wonderful writer, once said, the lesson is simple, the student is complicated.
Wow. Isn't that the truth? Packed. I mean, so many layers, right? In the student. So many layers. Many layers. And
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Well, if we focus again, what needs doing in this moment? What do I need to do in line with my goals? That simplifies it.
Mm-hmm. It's that acknowledgement and just inclusive, right? Just I'm including this because it needs doing and I'm acknowledging it needs doing. And for me, not preaching to the choir here by any means, but just going back to, my childhood with regards to, being taken to, church. I just remember one scripture very prominently, and that is that, faith without works is dead. So it's all about, you have to take action.
Yes, you don't want to act without thinking, of course, and you don't want to think without acting.
Right, exactly. And what you were saying about new age and the, the manifestation, I'm totally 100% there because I don't know. I mean, I could sit in this room where I am right now and, go into lotus position and, do my mudras and whatever. And, I can, visualize. But if I don't get out and get off my bum and do things, stuff is not going to happen. It's just the door, the doorman's not going to ring the door and say, here's everything that, you wished filled. So
Exactly.
yeah,
People like to dream about that I can just effortlessly manifest. And if that works for them, hey, keep doing it. But the horse I'm betting on is action over time.
exactly. I love it. I really do. Cause I'm so there with you completely. And that's what I'm, hoping to, be an example for people that are listening as well as for, bringing it right down to my granddaughter who, is 9, right? You've got to get out there and do it. It's not going to come to you. So yeah, absolutely. And I was going to ask you, Dan, because I cannot believe that you are what you mentioned with regards to your age.
Oh, 78.
Yeah.
Right.
Wow. Well, whatever you're thinking, drinking, I'll have some. And I was just going to ask you, what motivates you now to continue expanding this field? Because you are. I mean, you're not sitting at home doing nothing. You're out there expanding it into, into and many places and for many people.
Well, I'm just moved to do that. I don't believe in so much in praise and blame. I think we're hardwired to be who we are, and we need to find out who we are, not try to be somebody else because that's already taken. So I think it's about self-knowledge. I think life, that's one key to living, because if we don't really know ourselves, if we know our persona or an image of ourselves that we present to the world, if that's all we know, we end up making the right decision for the wrong person, the one we thought we were. People have that experience in relationships or careers. they make a decision, then they realize that's not who I am. So it takes a while to really know ourselves in the sense of what are my values? What are my interests? And what are my talents? What am I good at and not good at? And let those guide us. And the better we know ourselves, the wiser decisions we make. And I respect the process of each individual.
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe there's a best book or religion or philosophy or path or teacher or system of exercise or diet. I believe there's the best for each of us at a given time of our life. And life is an experiment. We have to find out what works best for us on our own path up that mountain of destiny.
I love it. And, like I said in the beginning, I really appreciate you being here with us today and your time. And I would love to have you back. I will be posting this and also to sending, attaching links to be able for people to contact you, to, be in touch with you, and also your website as well as your books, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I truly am honored and so very grateful that our paths in this life have passed through one another and continue to. And the fact that you are here with me today and for our listeners is truly an honor. I just, like I say, the moment I got on that flight and I devoured your book, it really did in many ways change my life because I was able to bring it into so many other people's lives, and so many other people have commented on it even till this day. So I really thank you wholeheartedly, and I wish you lots of love and lots of peace, and till we meet again.
Till we meet again, I appreciate your having me on, and my best to you and your listeners.
All right. Thank you so much, Dan. Take care.
Take care.
Lots of love. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.